Welcome back. I am John P. Today we are going to be talking about the upcoming watch releases from Omega and what I think that Omega is going to be doing with not only themselves as a company and a watch brand, but also what watches that I think are going to be modified and released in this upcoming watch release from the brand. Omega recently announced that they're going to be unveiling their new watches going forward in two different segments throughout the year, some with the novelties, some with maybe not so much of the novelties, but nonetheless, they're going to be unveiling in a different schedule than Swatch Group has done in the past with the traditional trade shows, where there were a couple different trade shows. Think Basel World, think Watches and Wonders, where ultimately trade shows have kind of ended up over the years. But because of things such as what happened with the pandemic and really the fact that everything is really predominantly online and digital at this point, Omega is just going to be releasing their watches in a couple of different Zoom calls throughout the year. This upcoming call, or I guess you'd call it digital convention in some sort of way, is going to be happening in March 7th of 2022, and Omega is going to be unveiling their new watch. So we're going to talk about that in just 1 second, but on the wrist today, I have a vintage Ennakar Sherpa guide. I love this watch. I love the brand Ennakar Vintage Watches. Certainly not the brand that exists today with the Ennakar name, but this is a brand I really do believe in vintage, and currently they're still pretty affordable for the value that they offer, so I recommend checking that out. You can see more about this watch and others on not only my Instagram, The Real John P, but also delraywatch.com, where we buy, sell, and trade watches, as well as sinclairstraps.com for the best premium watch straps. So Omega watches, I know there are many fellow watch collectors out there that are in agreement with me that the brand has done some phenomenal things in recent years. They've come a long way and they deliver so many things that we as watch collectors really want. The dive watches, the sport watches, different iterations of the classic iconic Omega Speedmaster Professional, and of course, let's not forget the whole James Bond partnership and collaboration. I love those watches so much. We actually had one at Delray Watch and I had a lot of fun with it. But things are changing in the watch world, and they're changing very quickly. The first thing that's happening is that prices are going up. And so before we talk about my predictions for what may or may not happen with the Omega watches based on what other brands are doing and where Omega has been going through my analysis, is that for sure Omega is going to increase their prices. For the last decade, Omega has been trying to scrape away and become more on par with the Rolex collector kind of fan base, as well as the quality of the Rolex watches. Personally, I think Omega 9 times out of 10 really has surpassed the quality in terms of the spec offerings from the brand. But that's definitely a side table discussion, which I've had in the past. But what we do see is Omega raising the prices to be commensurate with the quality that they're offering. Omega has been a great value brand, but now because the demand has increased, the market has changed, things like inflation, Omega will have no choice but to increase the price. So I think that we're going to see for sure across the board a retail price increase. And with the retail price increase comes the secondary market generally going up in terms of the pricing, right? Like the watches we trade at Delray Watch, the gray market, the prices are going to go up because the retail price goes up. And with that, we see increased demand for the Omega watches. We, for the last couple of years, have been able to obtain gray market Omega sport watches at an extremely deep discount for our customers at Delray Watch. And now the times are, if it's any of the hot models, think the Seamaster 300s, the Speedmasters, we just can't obtain them because authorized dealers and boutiques, they're just not willing to sell them at much under retail, if at all, at least in the United States, because the demand is so high and they can't actually get more of those watches from Omega to sell them to you. So with that, the discounts are drying up. If you see a great price on an Omega Seamaster or any of the other hot Omega watches, I recommend to not drag your feet on it because Omega is changing and the watch industry is changing quickly. And so that kind of sets the stage for the brand. Now, what do I think they're going to do in terms of the release as well? Something we have to keep in mind is that seemingly most brands out there are coming out with that Tiffany blue dial. Now, Omega doesn't have a Tiffany blue dial in a men's watch in their current catalog. They have blue dials, they have green dials, think the Aquaterra like we have at Del Rey Watch, but they just don't have any Tiffany blue dials for men in their collection. Now, of course, Omega is trying to compete with Rolex, but will they just copy that color, or will that seem too much of a copycat and not allowing themselves to be perceived on the same level as Rolex, right? We see a lot of brands, they're willing to kind of play the copycat because they understand, hey, Rolex is just a little bit different than what we're doing. They're in a different segment. They're focused on different collectors. We don't mind copying the kind of that hot trend. But then we see Patek Philippe come out with the 5711 with that Tiffany blue. Truly, I mean, they're not copying the Oyster Perpetual in any way because, in fact, they actually have the Tiffany stamp on the dial, and that kind of sets a little bit of a different tone. So I think we could easily see Omega come out with the Tiffany blue dial. Now, if I were them, I would probably put it on the Seamaster 300M. I think watch collectors, myself included, would absolutely lose their minds and be incredibly astonished and be chomping at the bit to purchase one of these watches. Now, if they put it on a Speedmaster, like you see in the thumbnail, that would be absolutely unbelievable, right? If the Omega Speedmaster Professional came out in that kind of a blue, fun tone like that, that would possibly break the internet, at least the segment of the internet where the watch collectors like myself hang out. That would be unbelievable. So I would love to see that. I'd love to see the Seamaster 300M in that color, but I think more than likely if they do come out with that color, it's probably going to be on the Omega Seamaster Aquaterra because of what the Aquaterra is, right? The Aquaterra is more in line with that Oyster Perpetual, so I think it makes a lot more sense, and it also is not a collection that has withstand decades and decades of being out in the market, right? To put it in a watch that is as old as the Speedmaster Professional might not make a lot of sense for continuity of the model, whereas compared to something a little bit more newer, like the Aquaterra, they can kind of take that risk. Now, as I think about it, there is an Omega Speedmaster that is a 38 millimeter, a smaller size that is not quite gendered, but they do have more feminine versions of the watch and they do have more masculine versions of the watch. There is an Orbis that was a partnership for this nonprofit that basically handles eye care and the health of eyes in underdeveloped places in the world. That's close to that color, but not quite. So I'm very excited to see if Omega is going to bite the bullet and do what a lot of brands have been doing and come out with this blue color. But with that and with the colors, I think Omega could easily put that Seamaster 300M that we all love, that ceramic bezel wave dial, in a green, right? They haven't done kind of the Hulk yet. They've put the green on the Aquaterra, but they haven't done the Hulk. You know, they've done the blue, they've done, you know, the black, they've had the couple of two-tones, they have the gray, they have the neck tone. There's so many other versions, you know, let's think the Beijing, the darker blue with the colored accents for the Olympics, but they haven't done the green yet. So I think that would be cool if they came out with that Hulk. They'd catch some flag for it and some scrutiny, and some critics would come out of the woodwork saying, hey, you know, you're copying the Hulk, but people would buy it nonetheless because they're buying everything else from the brand. So I think that's something that we could easily see from them. Now, also what I think is going to happen, just looking at the Omega website, is the Globemaster is something that they seem to be focusing on in their literature currently. This is a line that has kind of been overlooked, right? It's more of a competitor with the Datejust, I would say, than something like the Aquaterra. Sure, there are alternatives, but the Globemaster from Omega is more in line with that Datejust. It has that kind of fluted, more fancy bezel, but I think because of that, people probably are not buying it like they're buying the other Omega watches, which are a little bit more casual, a little bit more sporty, which is what is hot and what sells right now if you're not a watch model that is more iconic, to be less sporty, right? Think of Calatrava, Think, something from any of the other big brands. And so I think Omega, if they don't do this, they should do this. They should change the bezel to a flat bezel or a smooth bezel. Globemaster, this is going to open up that watch model to so many more buyers because it's going to be a little less fancy, a little bit more subtle. And I think today people really are looking oftentimes for that more everyday, casual, athleisure kind of a feel in their watches compared to something that is classy and refined on average. We all have our preferences, but what do you think about the Globemaster? I'd love to hear your opinions because otherwise this seems to be a pretty underappreciated watch model from Omega. Now, with this, I also think Omega's going to do something with the Constellation. Long-standing line, but it's changed styles. It's become more of that integrated look. It's become a little bit more sporty, less dressy, less flashy, but they have different iterations, versions. Omega's still figuring out the Constellation line and kind of where it falls in their segment. I'm not entirely sure the direction they're going to go with it, but it seems to be in that integrated style, much different than where the Constellation sat for a period of time, but certainly falling back in line with that Genta-esque feeling that we have and we see from many brands today and really have for almost the entirety of sporting watches and more casual watches have been in existence. So I think they're going to do something with the Constellation, probably change up some colors, maybe make some subtle changes to the models there. But once again, this is not necessarily a line that is focused on by watch collectors, but some markets seem to do pretty well with this line. Parts of Asia, and I always see it in the comments below whenever I bring up this line that, people say that this line does pretty well in certain parts of the world. Now, something I think Omega is going to discontinue is the Deville Prestige line. I kind of like the designs, to be very honest with you, but it's not really anything that appeals to me, and it kind of feels a little bit lost, right? It doesn't seem to fit the product catalog in a lot of ways, and I don't really see it falling into a clear segment of what the competitors are for that particular watch. It's a little bit more dressy, but it's not totally dressy. It's a little juvenile, a little fun, but it's not yet refined. I don't know what they're going to do with this line. I think they should probably just discontinue it and move on. It's kind of like with Tudor in the Glamour line. It's like, who's kind of buying that? Is it an impulse buy? Is it just someone looking for a nice watch and happens to purchase it? I think they're probably wasting their time if they were to update it and come out with new versions of the Deville Prestige line, but they're certainly able to do whatever they'd like. I personally have just never seen a watch collector or anyone really go out of their way to purchase one of these watches. Not saying they look bad, but they have so many other offerings that people really love. So what do you think about this line? I'd love to see it and hear it in the comments below. And last, this is something as well that doesn't have anything to do with watches, but more accessories. It seems like Omega is really kind of pushing the accessories line. They have the straps, which they sell straps at a very high price, much less than we do at sinclairstraps.com, that's for sure. But aside from the straps, they do bracelets, some other, trinkets, odds and ends. But there seems to be a bit of a push on their website for sunglasses and eyewear. I think that's interesting. It's something that Tag Heuer has kind of done either through licensing or directly from themselves. You see it with brands like Chopard as well, which of course they're, a jewelry house first and foremost. But to see that from Omega, which really just produces, for the most part, watches, is interesting. It shows that they're kind of trying to branch out. Maybe they're testing the waters, or maybe they just see a big market opportunity for eyewear. I see them making a push for it. I'd like to see what they do with it. It's confusing to me from a branding perspective to say, hey, we make enthusiast watches, but then we have eyewear. A little bit confusing to me, but I don't know. Maybe it's a bit of a just kind of a test run, see what happens. I'd love to see what they do with it, but I personally think it's confusing. What do you think about this? Leave that in the comments below. So what do we think about Omega watches? I know so many of us love and enjoy them, but what do you think that they are going to do? What are they going to release? What should they release? What is a dream watch that you wished Omega to be releasing? Let me know, comments below. Guys, please do not forget to thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I do appreciate it. You can find me on Instagram, TheRealJohnP, and do not forget to check out DelReyWatch.com. Thanks, guys. You've been chatting with John P.